Welcome to Safe Simple Sound, where we explore the human side of investing and financial decision making. I'm your host PK. With the help of my AI co hosts, we are here to guide you through the fascinating conversations that will transform how you think about money. In today's episode, we dive into a powerful psychological force that could be secretly sabotaging your investment returns: loss aversion. You will discover why the pain of losing money feels twice as strong as the joy of gaining it. And more importantly, how to overcome this bias to make better investment decisions. Let's begin.
Have you ever found yourself holding on to a losing investment, hoping it will eventually recover, even when all the evidence suggests you should just cut your losses? Well, you're not alone. Our emotions, particularly our aversion to loss, play a huge role in shaping our financial decisions, often in ways that directly contradict rational investment strategy.
That's so true. I can think of a few times I've done exactly that. It's like there's this mental block that makes it really hard to sell something at a loss, even if it's the right thing to do. How does this loss aversion actually impact our investment behavior?
Loss aversion is a powerful force in human psychology that has a profound impact on our financial decisions. Prospect theory, developed by Nobel Prize-winning researchers, showed that the pain of losing money is about twice as strong as the joy of gaining the same amount. This asymmetry leads to all sorts of problematic behaviors, like holding on to losing investments and selling winners too soon.
Fascinating. So this fundamental bias in how we perceive gains and losses can really sabotage our investment results if we don't understand it. I'm really curious to dive deeper into the specific ways loss aversion manifests and what we can do to overcome it. Where should we start?
The disposition effect is one of the clearest examples of loss aversion in action when it comes to investing. It describes the tendency for investors to hold on to losing investments too long, hoping to break even, while selling winning investments too quickly to lock in the gains. Even when the evidence suggests the losing investment should be sold and the winner held, our aversion to realizing losses leads us to make the opposite choice.
That's such a counterintuitive behavior, isn't it? I can see how that would really hurt long-term returns if investors are constantly selling their winners and hanging on to their losers. What are some of the psychological drivers behind the disposition effect?
I'm guessing it has to do with how we frame gains and losses relative to our original purchase price. Even if objectively the losing investment is a worse choice, that original price point becomes this mental anchor that makes it really hard to accept the loss, right?
Exactly right. Our perception of gains and losses is very much relative to these reference points, like the original purchase price. Even if selling at a lower price would be the optimal financial decision, the pain of taking a loss often prevents us from doing so. Understanding how these mental anchors influence our risk perception is crucial to overcoming the disposition effect.
So we've talked about how loss aversion and the disposition effect can really sabotage our investment results. What are some practical strategies investors can use to overcome these psychological biases?
There are a few key things investors can do. First, reframing your perspective to look at your portfolio as a whole rather than individual gains and losses can help reduce the emotional impact. Implementing systematic decision-making processes and investment rules can also override emotional biases, and focusing on total long-term return rather than whether each investment is above or below your purchase price provides a more accurate picture.
Those all sound like really helpful approaches. I'm especially intrigued by the idea of systematizing the decision-making process. How can that help combat loss aversion?
Having clear, predetermined investment rules and rebalancing schedules takes a lot of the emotion out of the equation. Rather than making reactive decisions based on fear or excitement, you're following a disciplined process aligned with your long-term goals. This can be a powerful way to short-circuit the mental biases that lead to poor investment choices.
That makes a lot of sense. And I imagine working with a financial advisor who really understands loss aversion could be incredibly valuable too, right?
Absolutely. Financial advisors play a crucial role in helping clients navigate the psychological challenges of investing. They can provide education, Design strategies that account for both financial and behavioral factors, and most importantly, help clients maintain perspective during market downturns when loss aversion tends to flare up.
Fantastic. Next, I'd love to dive deeper into the factors that influence our perception of gains and losses and how they can distort our financial decision-making.
Absolutely. One of the most important things to understand is that our perception of gains and losses is highly dependent on our reference points. In investing, the most common reference point is the price at which we purchased an investment. This purchase price becomes a powerful mental anchor that shapes how we view subsequent price movements.
So even if an investment has gone up in value overall, if it's currently below our purchase price, we're likely to view it as a loss, right? And that perceived loss triggers a much stronger emotional response than an equivalent gain.
Exactly. This is where loss aversion comes into play. Because losses are so psychologically painful, investors often make irrational decisions to avoid realizing those losses, even when it would be the financially optimal choice. They hold on to losing investments too long, hoping to get back to their reference point.
That's a really powerful insight. So our natural human desire to avoid the pain of loss can actually lead us to take on more risk by holding losing investments rather than cutting our losses and moving on. It's like our emotions are overriding our rational decision-making process.
That's right. And it's not just the purchase price that can serve as a reference point. Take, for example, an investor who bought a stock at $50, watched it rise to $100, but then saw it drop back to $80. Even though they're still up $30 overall, the drop from the $100 peak often feels like a painful loss. This is because the investor's reference point shifted to that $100 high.
Wow, I can definitely relate to that. It's like there's this constant mental recalculation of gains and losses happening, and it's all relative to these shifting reference points. No wonder it's so hard to make objective decisions.
This really highlights how crucial it is for investors to be aware of these psychological dynamics. If we can recognize when our emotions are distorting our perception of risk and return, we're in a much better position to make rational choices.
One effective approach is to reframe your thinking to focus on the overall performance of your portfolio, rather than the ups and downs of individual investments. By taking this broader view, the psychological impact of individual losses is diminished. It's also helpful to have a clear, systematic investment plan and to automate your investment decisions where possible. This helps take emotion out of the equation.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like creating a structure that helps us override our natural behavioral biases. And I imagine this is where working with a financial advisor who understands these psychological factors can be incredibly valuable too, right?
Absolutely. A skilled advisor can serve as an objective voice of reason, helping clients stick to their long-term plan, even when emotions are running high. This is especially important during market downturns, when loss aversion tends to be most acute.
Definitely. Advisors play a crucial role in providing behavioral coaching, helping clients reframe their thinking, and maintaining discipline. By understanding and proactively addressing the psychological factors that drive investor behavior, advisors can add significant value beyond just financial analysis and portfolio management.
This has been a fascinating exploration of how our perception of gains and losses shapes our financial behavior. The key takeaway for our listeners is that while loss aversion is a natural human tendency, we don't have to be controlled by it. Can we share some examples of how loss aversion might manifest in seemingly rational investment decisions?
Absolutely. One common manifestation is what's known as the break-even effect. This occurs when investors hold on to a losing investment, even when the rational choice would be to sell, because they're fixated on getting back to their original purchase price. They view selling below that price as a guaranteed loss, even if holding the investment is objectively riskier.
That's really interesting. So it's like the purchase price becomes this arbitrary but psychologically powerful reference point, and the desire to avoid cementing a loss relative to that reference point can lead us to take on more risk than we should.
Exactly. And the flip side of this is that investors often sell winning investments too early. The pleasure of locking in a gain relative to the purchase price outweighs the potential for further gains, so we see this irrational pattern of holding losers too long and selling winners too soon.
This really drives home how arbitrary these reference points can be. The purchase price is essentially a sunk cost, but psychologically we struggle to let it go. Are there other reference points that can distort our risk perception?
Definitely. Another common one is a stock's previous high. Let's say you bought a stock at $50 and it rises to $100 before dropping back to $80. Even though you're still up significantly from your purchase price, drop from $100 often feels like a painful loss. The $100 high becomes the new reference point, and anything below that feels like losing, even though you're still in the black overall.
Wow, that's a mind-bending example. It's like our notion of what counts as a gain or loss is constantly shifting based on these arbitrary price points in the past. No wonder it's so hard to evaluate investments objectively.
This is such an important insight. Our perceptions of risk and return are highly malleable and not always anchored in financial reality. How can investors protect themselves from being misled by these psychological biases?
The first step is simply being aware of them. Recognizing that your emotional responses to gains and losses may not reflect the true financial picture is a crucial starting point. Beyond that, it's helpful to have a clear, rules-based investment strategy. Predetermining when you'll sell an investment, both on the upside and the downside, can help prevent emotion-driven decisions in the moment.
That makes a lot of sense. By setting those rules in advance, when you're in a more neutral emotional state, you're essentially protecting yourself from your own psychological biases. And I imagine those rules should be based on an investment's fundamentals and your overall financial goals, not arbitrary price points, right?
Absolutely. Your investment decisions should be driven by your long-term financial plan, not short-term market movements. It's also important to remember that volatility is a normal part of investing. Temporary losses aren't the same as permanent losses of capital. Having that long-term perspective can help counter the emotional impact of short-term fluctuations.
These are hugely valuable insights for our listeners. The key takeaway is that while we can't eliminate our instinctive aversion to loss, we can learn to recognize when it's distorting our perspective. By setting clear investment rules, maintaining a long-term focus, and being aware of our own psychological biases, we can make more rational, goal-oriented investment decisions. Thank you both for this enlightening discussion. Those are great strategies for combating loss aversion in our investment decisions. I want to explore how loss aversion might affect other areas of our financial lives.
Loss aversion can influence many financial decisions, often in subtle ways. One area is in how we think about spending and saving. Studies have shown that people experience more psychological pain from a price increase than an equivalent amount of pleasure from a price decrease. So a $5 rise in our monthly Netflix subscription feels more impactful than a $5 drop.
That's fascinating. So even though the actual financial impact is the same, the framing as a loss versus a gain changes how we feel about it. I can see how that could make us resistant to price increases, even when they might be economically justified.
Exactly. This also relates to the concept of mental accounting, where we mentally categorize money into different buckets. We might be very reluctant to spend from our savings account, viewing it as a loss, even if we'd freely spend the same amount from our checking account. The money is fungible, but the mental categorization changes our perception.
This really highlights how psychological factors can distort our perception of value and cost. Are there other ways mental accounting and loss aversion interact?
Definitely. Mental accounting can lead us to make irrational decisions about spending and saving. For example, many people will drive across town to save $10 on a small purchase, but wouldn't bother to do the same to save $10 on a large purchase. The savings is the same, but we tend to view it relative to the total cost.
That's a great point. It's like we're more motivated to avoid a perceived loss on the small purchase than to secure an equivalent gain on the large one. The framing matters more than the actual financial impact.
These are important insights. It seems that being aware of how we mentally categorize money and how we frame gains and losses can help us make more rational financial decisions.
One effective strategy is to focus on your total wealth rather than individual mental accounts. Regularly reviewing your overall financial picture can help put any single spending decision into perspective. It's also helpful to consider the opportunity cost of your choices. That $5 monthly subscription increase might seem painful, but is it really more valuable than what you'd otherwise do with that $5?
I like that framework of opportunity cost. It helps reframe the decision from a perceived loss to a conscious trade-off. And I suspect a lot of our loss aversion in spending comes from not fully considering what we're trading off.
That's a keen insight. We often make spending decisions in isolation without considering the broader context of our financial goals and alternatives. By widening our perspective and considering the full set of trade-offs, we can make more intentional, rational choices.
We've seen how loss aversion and mental accounting can lead us astray not just in investing, but in our everyday financial decisions. The key takeaways are to be aware of these biases, consider our decisions in the context of our overall financial picture, and focus on the true opportunity costs of our choices. We explored how loss aversion can influence our investment choices. Loss aversion extends beyond investing and can affect many areas of our financial lives. Can you expand on that?
Certainly. Loss aversion is a pervasive psychological phenomenon that shapes our decisions whenever we evaluate potential gains and losses. One common area where we see loss aversion at play is in consumer behavior. For example, research has shown that people tend to experience the pain of a price increase more intensely than the pleasure of a price decrease of the same magnitude.
That's really interesting. So if a product I regularly buy increases in price by $1, that loss will feel more significant to me than the gain of a $1 price decrease on the same product.
Precisely. This asymmetry in how we process gains and losses can lead to some irrational economic behaviors. Retailers often exploit this by framing price changes as avoiding a loss, rather than getting a discount, even though the financial outcome is the same.
This really underscores the power of framing in shaping our perceptions. It seems our decisions are often less about the objective facts and more about how those facts are presented to us.
That's a key insight. Our psychological biases, like loss aversion, can systematically distort our evaluation of costs and benefits. Another related concept is mental accounting, where we mentally categorize money into different buckets and treat those buckets differently.
Can you give an example of how mental accounting might interact with loss aversion?
Sure. Imagine you have two investment accounts, one for retirement and one for a new car. Due to loss aversion, you might be very reluctant to take any money out of the retirement account, viewing it as a significant loss. However, you might freely spend from the car fund, even though the money is essentially interchangeable.
So even though the actual financial impact is the same, the mental categorization of the money changes our willingness to spend it. That's a powerful illustration of how psychological factors can override purely rational economic considerations.
This makes me wonder about the role of sunk costs. If we've already mentally allocated money to a particular purpose, we might be more willing to continue spending on that purpose, even if it's no longer the best use of the funds.
That's a great connection. The sunk cost fallacy is closely related to loss aversion. We often continue investing in projects or purchases because we don't want to feel the loss of admitting the original investment was misguided. This can lead to throwing good money after bad.
It's clear that loss aversion and related biases can lead us to make suboptimal financial decisions.
One effective approach is to try to view decisions from an outside perspective. Ask yourself, if a friend came to me with this dilemma, what would I advise them to do? This can help create emotional distance and allow for more objective evaluation.
I like that idea of gaining distance. It seems like a lot of these biases are exacerbated by our emotional proximity to the decision. If we can step back and view it more dispassionately, we might avoid some of those psychological pitfalls.
Another strategy might be to set up systems in advance, like automatic savings or investment plans. By committing to a course of action before the emotional impact of loss aversion kicks in, we can sidestep some of its effects.
That's a great point. Pre-commitment is a powerful tool for overcoming a wide range of psychological biases. By setting up clear rules and systems in advance, we can help ensure more rational and consistent decision-making.
This has been a fascinating exploration of how loss aversion and related concepts can shape our financial choices, often in subtle and surprising ways. The key takeaway seems to be awareness. By understanding these psychological factors, we can spot them in our own thinking and develop strategies to counter them. Thank you both for sharing your insights. I'd love to dive deeper into a specific manifestation of loss aversion in investing, the disposition effect.
Absolutely. The disposition effect refers to the tendency of investors to sell winning investments too quickly while holding on to losing investments for too long. Essentially, investors are disposing of their winners and clinging to their losers.
That seems counterintuitive. Why would investors want to get rid of investments that are performing well while keeping those that are losing money?
It ties back to the concepts of loss aversion and mental accounting that we discussed earlier. When an investment is up, investors are eager to lock in those gains, mentally moving the profits to a realized gains account. However, with losing investments, investors often hold on, hoping the price will rebound so they can at least break even. The pain of realizing a loss is more intense than the satisfaction of further gains.
So the disposition effect is really loss aversion in action. Investors are so averse to realizing losses that they make irrational choices about when to sell. Can you walk us through a concrete example?
Sure. Let's say an investor buys two stocks, A and B, at $100 each. Over the next year, stock A rises to $120 while stock B falls to $80. The disposition effect suggests that the investor will be tempted to sell stock A to lock in the $20 gain, but hold on to stock B to avoid realizing the $20 loss, even if the future prospects of stock B are bleaker.
I can see how that would be problematic. By selling winners too early, investors might miss out on future gains, and by holding losers too long, they could ride the stock all the way down.
Precisely. The disposition effect can lead to suboptimal portfolio management. Investors end up with a collection of loser stocks while missing out on the full growth potential of their winners. Over time, this can significantly drag down returns.
This really highlights how our psychological biases can lead us astray, even when we have the best intentions. It's not that investors are consciously trying to make bad decisions, but their loss aversion is steering them in the wrong direction.
That's a key point. These biases operate largely on a subconscious level. Even investors who are aware of the disposition effect can fall prey to it in the heat of the moment. That's why it's so important to have systems and strategies in place to counter these biases.
What kind of strategies could help mitigate the disposition effect?
One approach is to set predefined sell rules based on fundamental analysis, not emotional triggers. For example, decide in advance that you'll sell a stock if the company's financial health deteriorates, regardless of whether you're sitting on a gain or loss. This helps take the emotion out of the equation.
Another strategy might be regular portfolio rebalancing. By periodically selling winners and buying losers to maintain your target asset allocation, you're effectively countering the disposition effect systematically.
I could see how automating the process like that could help override our emotional impulses. It's like setting up guardrails for our own psychology.
Exactly. The more we can establish rational, predetermined guidelines for buying and selling, the less likely we are to fall victim to heat-of-the-moment emotional decisions. It's about being proactive in designing an investment process that accounts for our inherent biases.
This has been a great exploration of how the disposition effect demonstrates loss aversion in real-world investing contexts. The key takeaway seems to be that while we can't eliminate our psychological biases, we can develop strategies to manage them. By understanding how biases like loss aversion manifest in behaviors like the disposition effect, we're better equipped to make rational, long-term oriented investment decisions.
Thank you for joining us on Safe Simple Sound. Today's exploration of loss aversion and its impact on investment decisions reveals just how much our psychology influences our financial outcomes. To learn more about managing your emotional biases and making better investment choices, visit savesimplesound.com/podcast-episode-16. And remember, understanding your psychological tendencies is the first step to mastering them. Share this episode with someone who could benefit from these insights. And join us next time for more conversations that make managing money safe, simple, and sound.